It's Mamedyarov versus Karjakin in a high-stakes blitz showdown. We're kicking things off with the Queen's Indian defense, a solid and strategic choice for a must-win game. The first few moves are pure textbook. White stakes a claim in the center with d4 and c4, while black develops flexibly. Karjakin opts for a solid pawn on d6, keeping his options open in this classical setup. And now we see a mirror image strategy emerge. Both players prepare to fianchetto their light-squared bishops with g3 and b6, aiming to control the long diagonals and build pressure from the flanks. And Mamedyarov castles kingside. This is a brilliant move. It's not just about king's safety. He's cleverly inviting black to trade on c3, which would give white a powerful central pawn majority. A very deep idea. Karjakin takes the bait, capturing the knight on c3. After the queen recaptures, both sides finish their development. White's rook comes to the d-file, and black's queen tucks away on e8, preparing for the middle game. Karjakin probes with his knight to e4, asking a question of the white queen, but after she calmly steps back to c2, the knight retreats. A long maneuvering phase begins. The bishops find new posts. Pawns are pushed on the queen side to fix the structure, and the queens shuffle around, both players patiently improving their positions as they prepare for the coming conflict. The tension breaks in the center. Black pushes with e5, and white immediately locks it down with d5. Karjakin responds with c5, and now the pawn structure is fixed. The plans are clear. White will play on the king side, black on the queen side. With the center closed, the knights begin a complex dance. They're rerouted towards the king side, where the decisive action is about to unfold. Karjakin pushes his g-pawn, signaling his aggressive intentions, and Mamedyarov's knight hops to e3 to meet the threat. The king side is heating up. Black's knight lands on h5, and the queen joins it on f6, building a battery. Mamedyarov bravely walks his king up to f2, getting ready to join the fight himself as the pawns start rolling forward. White has a solid advantage here, but makes an inaccurate move, letting the pressure off. Instead of the move played, there was a much stronger pawn push. The engine loves pawn to f4. After knight to h7, the king steps to g2, and if queen to g6, pawn to f5 solidifies a huge edge. But in the game, Mamedyarov plays bishop to e2, and this gives Karjakin a golden opportunity to turn the tables and win a piece. And Karjakin finds it. Knight to h7 is the first move of the winning idea. The trap is set. White challenges immediately with pawn to h4, trying to disrupt black's kingside. But this recapture, pawn takes pawn on f3, is an inaccuracy. Karjakin misses a clever detail. Taking en passant on h3 would have won a clean pawn. White's bishop snaps up the pawn on f3, and his advantage is restored. And another slip from black. Queen to g6 misses the point. And the best plan was to create counterplay on the queen side with a pawn push to a4. Mamedyarov doubles rooks on the g-file, cranking up the pressure on the king. And that's a mistake. The knight retreats to f6, but this is a fatal error that allows white to blow the position wide open with a crushing pawn break. Mamedyarov had a decisive move here, a pawn break that would have ended the game. But incredibly, in the heat of the blitz battle, he misses it. The killer shot was pawn to g4. After knight to f4, pawn to g5 blows the cover off the king. Pawn takes, and the rook takes on g5 with a winning attack. Instead of that, white plays the quiet queen to e2, and the huge advantage completely vanishes. Karjakin is let off the hook, but black is inaccurate again. Knight to g7 is played, once again missing the crucial counterattacking idea with pawn to a4, and another mistake from white. Queen to d3 is played, and for the second time, the winning pawn push to g4 is missed. Now black has a chance to win a piece, and Karjakin goes for it. He pushes his pawn to h5, and after a rook move from white, the knight leaps into g4 with check. A flurry of trades on g4 leaves the position incredibly sharp, and now, a brilliant move. Rook to f8. Karjakin sacrifices a rook to create chaos, a stunning defensive resource that throws everything into confusion. What a find. Mamedyarov accepts the challenge, taking the bishop on g4 with his knight. But this is the critical mistake. The pawn recaptures on g4, but this is wrong. Had black taken with the queen instead, he would have been winning a piece. And Mamedyarov finds the only move to punish it, pawn to h5, a fantastic shot. The idea is to create an unstoppable passed pawn. If queen to h7, the rook swings to h4, the f-pawn pushes, and now pawn to h6 creates a monster. Black's knight takes the pawn on h5, but this is another inaccuracy. The best defense was to bring the queen to h7 to blockade. White improves his bishop to c1, preparing to join the attack, while black's f-pawn advances to create a defensive wall. Another fantastic move. Rook to f5. This powerful rook lift puts immense pressure on the king side, And here's the devastating point. If the king moves to g7, the rook takes the knight on h5. Rook to h8 defends, but bishop to h6 check wins the rook back with interest. The knight is forced back to the passive g7 square. And a third great move in a row. The rook lands on h6, completely paralyzing black's position. Mamedyarov is playing like a machine now. Black's queen shuffles to e8, but it's a desperate attempt to hold on in a dire situation. After that string of brilliance, white slips with an inaccurate rook move, releasing the pressure and giving black a glimmer of hope. The stronger move was rook to f2, and after pawn to a4, the queen slides to d1, then if queen to d7, queen to h1 keeps the attack raging. But in the game, the rook simply goes back to f1, and Karjakin gets a moment to breathe. Karjakin seizes the chance, pushing his pawn to a4 to create some queenside counterplay, and white responds with queen to e2, another inaccuracy that lets the advantage slip even further. Black finds the best reply with queen to d7, and after white takes on a4, the queen side is suddenly active. But this pawn push to f5 is an error. Black should have simply captured the pawn on a4 instead of opening up the king side for white's pieces, and Mamedyarov's rook immediately seizes the 6th rank, landing on g6 to renew the attack. Black's king move is another slip, and it walks right into a tactical shot that would have won a piece for white. Pawn to f4, pawn takes pawn on f4, pawn takes pawn on f4, bishop takes pawn on f4, rook to a7. Back in reality, the king steps to h7, and now white has a chance to land a decisive blow. But he misses it. Rook to g5 is played, but simply taking the pawn on f5 would have won a piece on the spot. Another chance goes begging in this chaotic game. Now black gets his pawn push to f4 in, leading to a flurry of trades as the central pawns are completely liquidated. And here, an inaccurate king move from black allows white to finally seize a material advantage by force. Queen to e7, rook takes pawn on g4, rook takes pawn on a4, bishop to g5, queen to e8. But instead, the king steps to g8, and this allows white to execute a tactic that wins a pawn, and white cashes in, pushing the e-pawn forward to disrupt black's coordination before the rook simply snaps up the free pawn on g4. Black's rook swings to f5, but this is an inaccuracy that just allows white to consolidate his winning position. White's bishop pins the knight, and Karjakin desperately gives up his rook for the dangerous e-pawn to stay in the game. The rook checks on e2, but this is another slip. A calmer retreat to e8 was the better defensive try, and white's king steps to h1. It's not the most clinical move. King to h3 was faster, but the position is still completely winning. And now, the final decisive blunder. Karjakin had one last chance to hold on, but his next move walks into a forced mating net. Rook to e1, rook takes knight on g7, check, queen takes rook on g7, bishop takes queen on g7, rook takes rook on f1, check. But in the game, he plays queen to e5, and this is a catastrophe. It allows a forced mate in 4. Incredible. Mamedyarov has mate in 4 on the board, but he misses it. This blitz game has been an absolute roller coaster. The winning move was queen to f7 check, king to h8, bishop takes knight check, king to h7, and rook to h4 check delivers mate. Instead of that, he plays rook takes knight on g7 with check. This is still winning, but the forced mate is gone. Karjakin gets one more chance to defend, and he blunders again. This move steps right into a new, even shorter mating sequence. Queen takes, rook on g7, bishop takes queen on g7, rook to e7, bishop to h6, pawn to b5, but back in the game, the king moves to h8, and this time it allows a forced mate in 2 moves. And this time, Mamedyarov doesn't miss. Queen to f8 check is the killer blow. It's all over because of this simple sequence. The rook is forced to take the queen on f8, and the other rook takes back for checkmate. And with that, Sergey Karjakin resigned. What a chaotic, brilliant, and blunder-filled game. But in the end, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov takes the victory. Karjakin saw there was no escape from the checkmate. After the queen check, the rook must capture on f8, and then the rook takes back, delivering checkmate on the back rank.